My name is Danielle. I am 33 years old. I pulled into the driveway after a brutal 12-hour shift at my corporate firm, only to find my entire life scattered across the front lawn. My father was standing on the porch screaming that I was a vampire sucking the family dry. My younger sister was literally kicking my luggage into the street. They thought they were finally taking out the trash. What they did not know was that the very ground they were standing on legally belonged to me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your own peace. I shifted my Honda into park and just stared through the windshield. My clothes were hanging from the oak tree branches. My books were dumped unceremoniously into the flower beds. Richard, my father, was marching down the driveway with his face practically purple with rage. He did not even wait for me to open the car door before he started shouting. "You are 33 years old, Danielle. You have been living in our basement for 3 years, sucking us dry like a goddamn vampire. I want you gone today." I stepped out of the car, and the humid Florida air hit me instantly. I looked past him to where my mother Susan was standing in the doorway clutching her pearls and glancing frantically at the houses across the street. "Keep your voice down, Richard," she hissed. "The neighbors are coming out onto their porches. You are making a scene, Danielle. Stop embarrassing us and just pack your junk." I did not say a word. I walked over to the grass and picked up a framed photograph of my grandfather that had been shattered. My sister Brittany, who was 29 but still acted like a spoiled teenager, strutted down the walkway. She was wearing a designer dress paid for by our parents. She kicked my canvas duffel bag hard, sending it tumbling into the gutter. "Later, loser," she laughed. "Have fun living in your terrible little car. Oh, and we are changing the Wi-Fi password too, so do not even try sitting in the driveway to steal it." Leaning against a brand new luxury SUV parked in the street was Brittany's husband Jamal. Jamal was a tall, athletic black man who always wore custom-tailored suits that he definitely could not afford on his own merit. He was the sales director at my father's dealership, a job he was handed on a silver platter because he married the golden child. Jamal crossed his arms and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Need a hand loading that garbage up, Danny," he sneered. "Because I do not want your cheap suitcase scratching the paint on my new ride. Move it before I call the city to tow your tragic little vehicle." I ignored all of them. I calmly walked over to the gutter and picked up my duffel bag. I opened the trunk of my car and started tossing my things inside. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not try to defend myself against the accusations that I was a leech. My silence seemed to infuriate Richard even more. He stomped over and kicked a pile of my sweaters. "Did you hear me?" he demanded. "You are a failure, Danielle. You work some boring desk job doing math all day, and you still have to beg us for a roof over your head. I am sick of looking at you. I am sick of supporting you while Jamal and Brittany are actually out there making something of themselves and building a real future." Susan scurried down the steps, her eyes darting nervously toward the neighbor house across the street. "Just go, Danielle," she pleaded, but her voice was dripping with venom, not pity. "You have caused enough stress for this family. Your sister is trying to plan her anniversary trip, and we cannot deal with your toxic energy dragging us down. You have never fit in with us. You have always been so difficult." I grabbed the last box of my belongings. It contained my old college textbooks and a few files I had brought up from the basement. I shoved it into the back seat and slammed the door shut. The loud thud echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I wiped a smudge of dirt from my blazer and turned to face my family. I walked right up to them, invading their personal space. I looked Richard dead in the eye. Then I looked at Susan, then Brittany. Finally, I locked eyes with Jamal, who suddenly stopped laughing. "Hope you all sleep good tonight," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "Because one day, very soon, none of you are going to sleep at all." Richard scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. "Get the hell off my property," he barked. I turned around, got into my car, and started the engine. I put it in drive, and peeled out of the neighborhood, leaving them coughing in the exhaust fumes. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I just drove away from the house I grew up in, the house they thought they owned. Fast forward exactly 3 days. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury downtown penthouse. I stood in my expansive kitchen wearing a silk robe brewing a fresh cup of artisan coffee. I had owned this penthouse secretly for 2 years. The basement I was supposedly living in was just a staging ground, a place to keep up appearances while I executed my plan. My real life as a senior financial risk actuary was incredibly lucrative. I walked over to the marble kitchen island and tapped the screen of my phone. It immediately lit up with a barrage of notifications. 168 messages. They were a mix of frantic texts, missed calls, and unhinged voicemails from Richard, Susan, Brittany, and Jamal. I took a slow sip of my coffee and hit play on the first voicemail. It was Richard. The recording was stamped from yesterday afternoon. "Danielle, pick up your phone right now," he bellowed, his voice echoing slightly as if he was pacing in his office at the dealership. I went to pay the vendor for the new boat shipments, and the corporate card declined. "Did you touch something before you left? Did you mess with the accounting software on your way out? Call me back immediately." I smiled and swiped to the next message. This one was from Susan, sent late last night. "Danielle, this is not funny," she whispered, sounding completely panicked. "Your father is tearing the office apart. The bank is telling us our credit lines are frozen. They will not even let me use my personal card at the grocery store. You work in finance. You need to fix this bank error right now. This is unacceptable." The next few messages were a flurry of angry texts from Brittany. "Dude, Dad is legit freaking out back here. What did you do? You are such a psycho. Jamal cannot even access his payroll account. You better not have hacked us or Jamal is going to call the cops." I laughed out loud in the quiet of my penthouse. Jamal calling the cops was the funniest thing I had heard all week, considering what I knew about his extracurricular financial activities. The final voicemail was from Richard, again left at 6 in the morning today. He did not sound angry anymore. He sounded terrified. "Danielle, please pick up. The dealership accounts are completely locked. The bank manager is saying our entire portfolio has been red flagged and transferred to a third-party holding company. I cannot make payroll today. I cannot pay the floor plan interest. The whole business is paralyzed. I need you to look into this. You owe us that much after everything we did for you." I set the phone down on the cold marble counter. I walked over to my laptop, which was resting on the dining table, and opened it. The screen illuminated, displaying the secure portal for Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings was a private limited liability company that I had created from scratch. It was the very same company that had quietly purchased Richard dealership debt from the failing local bank 2 years ago when he almost went bankrupt the first time. They thought it was a bank error. They thought the system was just glitching. They had no idea that their own daughter, the vampire they had just kicked to the curb, was the one holding the remote control to their entire financial existence. I clicked my mouse, confirming the permanent freeze on all of their operational accounts. The screen flashed a green checkmark indicating the action was successful. The eviction on the lawn was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. It was Tuesday afternoon when the illusion of my family being untouchable finally shattered in the middle of my corporate lobby. I worked at a prestigious financial risk management firm located in the heart of the downtown financial district. My office was on the 40th floor, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. This was the life I had built with my own 2 hands while my family thought I was a pathetic loser living in their basement. I was wearing a tailored navy blazer and a crisp white blouse, holding a stack of actuarial reports that I had just presented to our executive board. But as I stepped out of the glass elevator and into the expansive marble lobby of our building, my sense of peace was abruptly interrupted. Standing right next to the grand reception desk was Jamal. My sister Brittany's husband looked entirely out of place despite his expensive custom-tailored suit. He was pacing back and forth, furiously checking his gold watch and glaring at the security guards who were eyeing him suspiciously. Jamal was a very tall and physically imposing black man who usually used his size to intimidate people into getting whatever he wanted. He spotted me walking out of the elevator and his face twisted into a scowl. He marched across the polished marble floor, his heavy leather shoes echoing loudly. He did not care that this was a professional environment. He only cared about regaining the control that my family was so rapidly losing. Danielle. He barked loudly enough to make a group of analysts turn their heads. What kind of game are you playing? You need to fix this right now. He stepped directly into my personal space, towering over me and attempting to cast a shadow over my face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked up at him with a calm, detached expression. What are you doing here, Jamal? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. This is a secure building. You cannot just storm in here and throw a temper tantrum like a toddler. He sneered and reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that looked like it had been hastily printed off the internet. Sign it, he demanded, pointing a thick finger at the bottom of the page. It is a financial release form. Richard had his lawyer drafted up this morning. It basically says that any holds or freezes you placed on the dealership accounts were a mistake, and you authorized the bank to release the funds immediately. Sign the paper, Danielle, and we can all pretend this little stunt of yours never happened. I picked up the piece of paper and scanned it. It was a joke. It was not drafted by a lawyer. It was full of typos and lacked any basic legal terminology. They were desperate. They had no idea that I was the actual owner of the holding company that now possessed all of their debt. I let out a soft laugh and dropped the paper back onto the table. I am not signing anything, Jamal, I said. You and Richard got yourselves into this mess. You can figure out how to get yourselves out of it. Jamal's face hardened. His nostrils flared and he took another step closer, physically backing me against the glass railing of the lobby. You do not understand what is happening here, he hissed, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. The dealership is bleeding cash. Richard is having chest pains. Brittany is crying in her bedroom because her credit cards are declining. You are going to sign this paper, or I am going to make sure your boss knows exactly what kind of vindictive thief he has working for him. He was trying to gaslight me in the middle of my own workplace. He thought I was still the quiet, obedient girl who lived in the basement and took their abuse with a lowered head. He was so incredibly wrong. I looked past his shoulder and noticed that two of the building's security guards had started walking toward us. My firm handled highly sensitive financial data, and any physical altercation in the lobby was treated as a severe security threat. But I did not need security to handle Jamal. I had something much sharper than a badge and a radio. I had the truth, and I was about to use it to completely destroy his carefully constructed life. I took a deep breath and let my voice project loudly across the lobby. I made sure every single person within a 50-foot radius could hear exactly what I was about to say. Do not threaten me, Jamal, I said sharply. And do not stand there and pretend you care about Richard dealership or my sister Tears. You are not panicking because the family business is failing. You are panicking because the freeze on those corporate accounts means you can no longer cover up your embezzlement. Jamal's entire body went rigid. The color seemed to drain from his face, and his jaw dropped slightly. Keep your voice down, he hissed, his confident facade instantly crumbling. What the hell are you talking about? I am talking about the $300,000 you siphoned out of the dealership payroll account over the last 14 months, I announced, my voice ringing clear over the ambient noise of the lobby. I am talking about the fake vendor invoices you created to funnel that money into offshore crypto wallets. You thought Richard was too technologically illiterate to notice the missing funds, and you were right. But you forgot that I am a financial risk actuary. I see every single number. I see every hidden transaction. I know about the Cayman Islands account, Jamal. I know exactly where the money went. And more importantly, so does the Internal Revenue Service. Jamal looked like he had just been struck by lightning. His eyes darted frantically toward the exit doors, and then back to me. His imposing height suddenly seemed meaningless. He looked terrified. You are lying, he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. You do not know anything. You are just making things up to ruin my marriage. I pulled my phone out of my blazer pocket and tapped the screen. I already submitted the fraud report, Jamal, I said calmly. I submitted it anonymously to the federal authorities 3 days ago, right after my father threw my belongings onto the front lawn. The reason the bank froze those accounts is because the dealership is now the subject of an active federal financial investigation. Jamal took a step back, stumbling over his expensive leather shoes. He did not say another word. He turned around and practically sprinted toward the revolving glass doors, abandoning his arrogant demeanor. One of the tall security guards approached me, looking incredibly concerned about the sudden commotion. I simply smiled politely and adjusted my blazer. "Everything is perfectly fine," I replied smoothly. "He is just leaving." The game was only just beginning for them all, and I held every winning card. It was less than 24 hours after Jamal fled my office lobby when my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, Susan. I stared at the caller ID for a long moment before finally answering. I expected more screaming, or perhaps another unhinged demand from Richard. Instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of hospital monitors beeping faintly in the background. Danielle, Susan whispered, her voice trembling and weak. "Please do not hang up on me. I am at the emergency room. Your father had a severe panic attack this morning and collapsed in the kitchen. My chest is so tight, Danielle. I think I am having a heart attack too. The doctors are running tests, but I am so scared. Please come to the hospital." I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair and let out a slow breath. Growing up, I would have dropped everything and rushed to her side, panicking and crying. But I was 33 years old now, and I knew Susan better than anyone. She was a master manipulator who used illness as a weapon whenever she was losing control. I knew she was lying because the beeping in the background sounded exactly like a cheap internet sound effect played from a tablet. "I am not coming to the hospital, Susan," I said flatly. "If you are truly having a medical emergency, the doctors will take care of you." Her weak breathing suddenly paused. The fake hospital noise in the background abruptly stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was significantly stronger, though still dripping with manufactured victimhood. "How can you be so heartless?" she sobbed. "We are your family, Danielle. Please, I just need to see you. I need to talk to you face to face. We can fix this mess together." "Fine," I replied coldly. "But I am not meeting you at a hospital, and I am certainly not going to that house. I will meet you at the busy coffee shop on 5th Avenue in exactly 1 hour. If you are not there, I am blocking your number permanently." I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. It was a bustling, spacious place filled with corporate workers typing on laptops and baristas calling out complex drink orders over the hum of espresso machines. I chose a small table right in the middle of the room, perfectly visible to dozens of witnesses. I ordered a black iced coffee and waited patiently. Precisely on time, Susan walked through the heavy glass doors. She did not look like a woman who was just experiencing a heart attack in an emergency room. She looked absolutely impeccable. She was wearing a designer silk blouse, perfectly applied makeup, and carrying a handbag that cost more than most people make in an entire month. She spotted me and marched over, pulling out the metal chair across from me and sitting down heavily. She did not bother ordering a drink or saying hello. She just leaned forward, placing her manicured hands flat on the wooden table. "You look perfectly healthy for someone who was just dying in a waiting room," I observed, taking a slow sip of my iced coffee. Susan waved her hand dismissively, completely dropping the sick act without a shred of embarrassment. "I had to get your attention, Danielle," she hissed, her eyes darting around the crowded room to make sure no one was listening too closely to our conversation. "You have been ignoring your father completely, and you humiliated Jamal at your office yesterday. Do you have any idea what you are doing to us right now? You are tearing this family apart piece by piece." "I am simply securing my assets," I replied calmly. "You and Richard threw me out on the street. I am just enforcing the financial boundaries you demanded when you kicked my bags into the gutter." Susan let out a dramatic sigh, pressing a hand to her chest as if she was wounded by my words. "I carried you in my womb, Danielle. I sacrificed my youth and my body to give you a good life. We fed you, we clothed you, we let you live in our house rent-free for 3 years while you supposedly saved up for your own place. And this is how you repay your own flesh and blood. You freeze our accounts and try to steal your father's business away from him. I let her talk. I let her spin her web of delusion because I knew what was coming next. The fake medical emergency was just the hook to get me here. Now came the trap. Susan leaned even closer, dropping her voice to a harsh, desperate whisper. The federal tax authorities sent an agent to the dealership this morning. She said, her eyes wide with genuine panic this time. They are auditing the business, Danielle. They are demanding to see 5 years of tax returns, payroll records, and offshore transfer receipts. Richard is absolutely terrified. If they look too closely at Jamal's department, they are going to find things. Things that could put your father and your brother-in-law in federal prison for a very long time. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise, even though I was the one who triggered the audit in the first place. And what exactly does that have to do with me, Susan? You are a senior financial risk actuary, she demanded, her tone shifting from victim to commander. You know how these federal audits work better than anyone. You know how to hide numbers and restructure corporate debts. You are going to log into the dealership accounting system and fix the books for us. You are going to make this audit go away. And then you are going to unfreeze those accounts so we can get back to our normal lives. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. She was sitting in a crowded public coffee shop, casually demanding that I commit federal tax fraud to cover up their massive financial crimes. She truly believed that I was still under her total control, that she could just snap her fingers and I would risk my own freedom to save people who had treated me like garbage my entire life. I smiled gently, setting my coffee cup down on the table. No, I said simply. Susan's face flushed bright red with sudden fury. What do you mean, no? She snapped loudly, drawing the attention of a man sitting at the next table. You owe us, Danielle. We are your parents, and we are ordering you to help us. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied, my voice cold and steady. You chose to let Jamal embezzle money. You chose to live far beyond your means. You chose to throw me out on the lawn like trash. You can face the consequences of your own actions all by yourself. Susan's eyes narrowed into dangerous, hateful slits. The loving mother facade completely melted away, revealing the vicious, self-serving woman underneath. If you do not do this, Danielle, I swear to God I will destroy you, she threatened, her voice trembling with rage. I will go to your firm and tell your boss that you are a thief. I will tell them you hacked into our family business accounts and stole our money. I will go to the police and file charges against you for corporate espionage. I will drag your name through the mud until you lose your fancy job and your entire career is completely ruined. Everyone in this city will know you are a criminal. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone, placing it face up on the table between us. I tapped the screen, opening the voice memo application. The red timer was ticking brightly. It had been recording since the moment she sat down at the table. You are welcome to try, Susan, I said, picking up my iced coffee again. But if you go to my boss or the police, I will simply play them this recording of you demanding that I commit federal tax fraud to cover up your embezzlement scheme. I will also hand over the IP addresses proving that Richard authorized the offshore transfers. So go ahead, call the police right now. I dare you. Susan stared at the recording phone, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She was completely trapped. Her grand manipulation had backfired spectacularly. She had handed me the exact evidence I needed to destroy her credibility forever. She grabbed her expensive handbag, scraped her metal chair back loudly, and stood up. You are an absolute monster, she whispered, tears of genuine frustration finally filling her eyes. No, Susan, I replied, taking one last satisfying sip of my coffee. I am just the daughter you created. Now get out of my sight before I send this recording to the federal agent currently sitting in Richard's office. Susan turned and practically ran out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone in the bustling room. I smiled, enjoying the sweet taste of absolute victory. I took another slow, satisfying sip of my iced coffee, relishing the total peace. Susan stood there trembling with rage but did not immediately walk away. She was too arrogant to believe she had actually been bested. She leaned over the table again, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure spite. "You think you are so smart, Danielle?" She spat, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think because you have a fancy corporate job, you can look down on us. You owe your entire life to me and your father. We gave you absolutely everything." I looked at her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table and felt a cold wave of absolute clarity wash over me. "You gave me nothing, Susan," I said, my voice steady and loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear clearly. "In fact, you took everything I had before I even had a chance to build it. Do you really want to talk about what I owe you? Let us talk about my 18th birthday. Let us talk about the gift you and Richard gave me when I legally became an adult." Susan blinked, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I do not know what you are talking about," she muttered defensively, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "I am talking about my social security number," I said, leaning forward so she could see the raw intensity in my eyes. "I am talking about the 4 credit cards and the massive personal loan you and Richard opened in my name, the very week I turned 18. You forged my signature. You maxed out every single line of credit within 6 months. You completely destroyed my credit score before I even graduated from high school. And what did you buy with all that stolen money, Susan? Did you pay the mortgage? Did you invest it in the family dealership?" She looked away, her jaw tight. "That was a very difficult time for the family," she whispered, trying to maintain her victim act. "We did what we had to do to survive." "Survive?" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You bought Brittany a brand new convertible for her college acceptance. You took her on a 3-week luxury vacation to Europe. You bought yourself a whole new wardrobe for your country club luncheons. You funded your golden child lavish lifestyle by chaining me to a mountain of fraudulent debt. I spent my 20s living in a tiny apartment, eating instant noodles and working 3 jobs just to pay off the massive financial hole you dug for me." "You are being dramatic," Susan hissed, looking around the coffee shop as a few people started staring at us openly. "We always planned to pay you back." "You never planned to pay me back," I corrected her smoothly. "Every late shift I worked, I was not just paying off the debt you stole from me. I was studying. I was analyzing financial markets. I became a senior financial risk actuary because I needed to understand exactly how people like you hide your dirty money. And more importantly, I learned how to legally dismantle people like you." Susan scoffed, leaning back in her metal chair. "So what?" she mocked. "You got a good job and paid off a few credit cards. That does not give you the right to destroy your father business now." "It was not just a few credit cards," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous chill. "It was the foundation of my entire plan. 10 years ago, I started quietly funneling every spare dollar I earned into a private, limited liability company. I called it Apex Holdings. I moved into your dark, damp basement 3 years ago, not because I was broke, but because I wanted to watch you up close. I wanted to see exactly how careless you and Richard had become with your finances. I sat at your dinner table playing the pathetic loser daughter while my company was actively buying up the distressed debt portfolios from the local banks." Susan frowned, her perfectly shaped eyebrows pulling together in confusion. "What does your little shell company have to do with our bank accounts?" "I am saying that I am the bank, Susan." I stated, clearly articulating every single syllable. "When Richard almost bankrupted the dealership 2 years ago, the local bank refused to give him another loan. They sold his toxic debt to a private holding company. My holding company. I own the mortgage on the dealership lot. I own the liens on the boat inventory. And I own the deed to the house you are currently living in. You do not owe a faceless corporation, Susan. You owe me. And I am calling in every single penny today." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable stepping stone, and now I was the mountain falling directly on top of her. "You cannot do this!" She finally choked out, her voice shaking with genuine terror. "We are your family, Danielle. You are going to leave us homeless. You are going to put Jamal in federal prison and leave Brittany with absolutely nothing. You are a sick, evil little girl." "I am the exact woman you forced me to become," I replied, picking up my iced coffee. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have an important meeting with my corporate attorneys to finalize the foreclosure paperwork on your house." Something inside Susan completely snapped. Decades of unearned entitlement and unchecked narcissism boiled over into blind, irrational rage. She let out a guttural scream that echoed through the entire coffee shop. She grabbed her heavy ceramic coffee mug from the table and hurled it directly at me. The mug shattered against my shoulder, splashing lukewarm, dark roast coffee all over my crisp white blouse and tailored navy blazer. Loud gasps erupted from the surrounding tables. A barista shouted something in surprise and dropped a metal tray. I did not flinch. I did not scream back. I calmly picked up a paper napkin and wiped a drop of coffee from my cheek. Then I reached across the table and picked up my phone. It was still propped up against the sugar dispenser, exactly where I had left it. "You should really learn to control your temper, Susan," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level as I slowly turned the phone screen around so she could see it clearly. "Especially when you are broadcasting live to an audience." Susan's eyes darted to the screen, her face contorted in absolute horror. She saw the bright red live icon flashing in the top corner. I had been live streaming the entire 30-minute interaction directly into the private Facebook group of her elite country club. Every single woman in her social circle had just watched her confess to stealing my identity and violently assaulting me. Susan let out a horrifying high-pitched wail and ran blindly outside. It was Thursday afternoon. 2 days had passed since my mother ran out of that coffee shop, leaving her country club reputation completely shattered on the floor. I was feeling an incredible sense of clarity. I left my corporate office a little early to run some errands. I drove my sleek new luxury sedan. I had finally traded in the old Honda after I left their house. It was time to start living openly in the reality I had built. I pulled into an upscale parking garage located beneath a high-end shopping district. The concrete walls echoed with the low hum of expensive engines. I found a spot on the second level right under a bright fluorescent light. I put the car in park and gathered my purse. I was completely unaware that the golden child of the family was currently hunting me down. I stepped out of my car and locked the doors. The electronic chirp echoed in the empty concrete structure. As I turned toward the elevator bank, a sharp, furious voice pierced the quiet air. "Danielle." I stopped and turned around. Stomping out from behind a massive concrete pillar was my younger sister Brittany. I almost did not recognize her at first. Brittany had spent her entire 29 years looking like a flawless magazine cover. She usually wore immaculate designer outfits and had perfect hair, but right now she looked completely unhinged. Her blonde hair was messy and plastered to her sweaty forehead. Her designer sunglasses were pushed askew on top of her head. She was clutching a single shopping bag from a luxury boutique, but her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. She marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You ruined everything!" She screamed, her voice echoing loudly, bouncing off the concrete walls. "You absolutely ruined my life." I stood my ground, leaning casually against the driver's side door of my car. I watched her throw her tantrum with the same detached observation I used for analyzing risk spreadsheets. "What exactly did I ruin, Brittany?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. She stopped a few feet away from me, panting heavily. "Everything," she shrieked. "Do you have any idea what happened to me today? I was at the boutique. I was trying to buy a dress for the anniversary gala this weekend. The cashier ran my platinum card and it declined, so I gave her my gold card, and that declined too. I had to stand there in front of half the women in my social circle, while the manager told me my accounts were frozen for suspected fraud. I was so humiliated I could barely breathe. Then my friend texted me a screen recording from Mom Country Club Facebook group. She saw the video, Danielle. Everyone saw the video of you and Mom at the coffee shop. Do you know what people are saying about us? People are calling us criminals. My friends are not returning my texts. You completely destroyed my reputation. I looked at her without a single ounce of pity. Your reputation was built on stolen money, Brittany, I said simply. Mom and Dad stole my identity to buy you those designer clothes and those luxury vacations. You are not a victim here. You are just upset because the ATM finally ran out of cash and the world finally sees you for exactly what you are. A spoiled, entitled brat who has never worked a day in her life. Brittany let out a guttural scream. Her eyes went completely wild. You shut your mouth, she yelled. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad loved me more. You are a bitter, lonely hag who wants to drag us all down into the dirt with you. I am going to make you pay for what you did to my family. She dropped her shopping bag on the dirty garage floor and lunged at me. She threw her hands forward, her manicured fingernails aimed directly at my face. She wanted to scratch me. She wanted to leave physical marks to match the emotional damage she felt. But I had spent years anticipating their explosive tempers. I smoothly stepped to the side, entirely avoiding her attack. Brittany stumbled forward, losing her balance and crashing hard into the side of my car. The impact knocked the wind out of her for a brief second. Instead of calming down, the physical pain only enraged her further. She pushed herself off the side of the car and reached into her expensive handbag. She pulled out a heavy ring of metal keys. Her face was red and distorted. If you are going to take my money and humiliate me, then I am going to destroy the only thing you care about, she snarled. She raised the keys, gripping them tightly, preparing to drag the jagged metal directly across the pristine paint of my brand-new luxury vehicle. I did not try to physically wrestle the keys away from her. I did not scream for help. I simply took 3 steps backward, creating a safe distance between us. Go ahead, Brittany, I said, my voice completely flat. Do it. Scratch the car. Brittany hesitated for a fraction of a second, her keys hovering just inches from the glossy paint. She was confused by my lack of panic. You think I will not do it? She challenged, her voice shaking. I know you will do it, I replied smoothly. That is exactly why I want you to look right above the rearview mirror. Brittany froze. She slowly turned her head and looked through the windshield of my car. Mounted right behind the glass was a high-definition dual-lens dash camera. The small red recording light was blinking steadily. It captured a wide-angle view of the entire confrontation. It had recorded her screaming her admission of knowing about the stolen money, her attempt to claw my face, and her current aggressive stance with a weapon in her hand. I took one more step back and pointed up toward the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. And while you are at it, you might want to smile for the security camera mounted right above us, I added casually. This is a secure corporate garage, Brittany. There are high-definition lenses covering every single square inch of this facility. You are currently holding a weapon with the intent to commit vandalism and assault. You are already an accessory to federal tax fraud and embezzlement because you lived off the stolen funds. Do you really want to add felony vandalism and attempted battery to your growing list of legal problems? Brittany stared at the blinking red light. The heavy ring of keys suddenly seemed to burn her skin. Her hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The manic energy that had fueled her ambush evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, terrifying realization. She slowly lowered her arm, letting the keys drop to her side. She looked at me, and for the first time in her entire life, she looked truly afraid of me. You are a psycho, she whispered, her voice cracking. You planned all of this. You set us up. I did not set you up, Brittany, I replied, stepping forward and picking up her dropped shopping bag from the dirty floor. I tossed it lightly against her chest, forcing her to catch it. I just stopped letting you use me as a shield. You built your own trap. I am just the one who finally locked the door. I pressed the button on my key fob and my car doors unlocked with a sharp beep. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat. Brittany was still standing there, frozen in shock, staring at the blinking red light of the camera. I rolled down the window just enough to deliver my final message. "You should probably head home and start packing your bags," I told her. "Because when the federal agents finish looking at Richard books, you are not going to be able to afford that designer lifestyle anymore." I rolled the window up, started the engine, and backed out of the parking space. I left the golden child standing completely alone in the cold concrete garage, grasping her useless shopping bag and realizing that her perfect world was officially over. I was just about to shift my car into reverse and leave Brittany standing in the cold parking garage when the sharp screech of heavy tires echoed through the concrete structure. A massive black luxury SUV came speeding around the corner, moving way too fast for a pedestrian zone. It slammed on the brakes and swerved diagonally, directly blocking my path to the exit. The driver's side door flew open, and Jamal stepped out. He was wearing his usual expensive custom-tailored suit, but he looked completely frantic. His tie was loosened, and he was sweating heavily. Brittany let out a loud, dramatic sob of relief the moment she saw him. She genuinely believed her knight in shining armor had arrived to defend her honor and put me in my place. "Oh, Jamal," she cried, running toward him with her arms outstretched. "Thank God you are here. Danielle has lost her mind. She is trying to steal everything from Mom and Dad. She just threatened to have me arrested, and she was saying horrible things about you. You need to do something, Jamal. Tell her to give us our money back right now." Brittany reached out to hug him, but Jamal did not open his arms. Instead, he violently shrugged her off, pushing her aside with a look of absolute disgust. "Get off me, Brittany," he snapped, his deep voice echoing loudly off the concrete walls. "You and your entire family are completely toxic. I am not going down with this sinking ship." Brittany stumbled back, her high heels scraping awkwardly against the pavement. Her face contorted in shock and confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Jamal?" she whimpered, clutching her useless shopping bag to her chest. "It is me. It is your wife. We have to stand together and fight her." Jamal let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Fight her," he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "There is no fighting this, Brittany. It is over. The dealership is completely gone. Federal agents raided the main office 20 minutes ago. They are confiscating the computers, seizing the filing cabinets, and locking the doors. Your father is sitting in the lobby crying like a baby while they box up his entire life. The bank officially called in the $2 million commercial loan. You guys have absolutely nothing left. Not a single dime." Brittany gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Her eyes darted wildly between Jamal and me. "No," she whispered. "No, that cannot be true. Mom said we just needed to fix a bank error." Jamal ignored her entirely. He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded manila envelope. He practically threw it at Brittany's chest, forcing her to catch it before it hit the dirty garage floor. "Here," he barked coldly. "I had my lawyer draft these up the second I left Danielle's office on Tuesday. I was waiting to see if your father could somehow miraculously secure an emergency loan to bail us out. But the raid today sealed the deal. I am done." Brittany's hands trembled as she fumbled to open the envelope. She pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. Her eyes scanned the first page and her jaw dropped. "These are divorce papers," she choked out, her voice breaking into a high-pitched squeal. "You are divorcing me, right now, in a parking garage, after everything we have been through together." "What exactly have we been through together?" "Brittany?" Jamal sneered, his face twisting into a cruel mask of pure selfishness. "We spent your parents' money. That is all we did. You do not have a job. You do not have any skills. You do not even know how to do your own laundry. You were a fun trophy wife when the credit cards were working, but I am not sticking around to pay your bills while your family goes to federal prison. I have my own future to think about. I am moving out tonight. Do not try to contact me." Brittany let out a piercing, agonizing scream that sounded like a wounded animal. She collapsed onto her knees right there on the dirty concrete floor, surrounded by her scattered divorce papers and her single luxury shopping bag. She sobbed hysterically, burying her face in her hands, completely broken by the sudden brutal betrayal of the man she thought loved her. Jamal did not even look down at her. He completely dismissed the woman he had been married to for 3 years and turned his attention directly to me. He walked slowly toward my car, raising his hands in a placating gesture, as if he was approaching a wild animal. He tried to compose his face into a smooth, charming smile, but the panic in his eyes was painfully obvious. "Look, Danielle," he said, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "I know we have had our differences in the past. I know I have said some things that were out of line. But you are a smart businesswoman, and I respect that. You played a brilliant game and you won. You took them down perfectly. I kept my window rolled down just a few inches, keeping my hands relaxed on the steering wheel. I did not say a word. I just let him dig his own grave." Jamal took another step closer, resting his large hands on the hood of my car. "Listen to me, Danielle," he pleaded. "I can help you completely bury Richard. I know where he keeps the physical ledgers for the off-the-books cash transactions. I know which local politicians he bribed to get the zoning permits for the boatyard. I have copies of the fake vendor invoices on a secure hard drive. If you go to the federal agents with just your actuary reports, they might only get him for civil fraud. But if you bring them my hard drive, they will put him away for a decade. I will give you everything. I will testify against him in court. I will serve him up on a silver platter. And what exactly do you want in return for this heroic display of loyalty, Jamal?" I asked, my voice dripping with heavy sarcasm. Jamal swallowed hard, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. "I just need you to unfreeze my personal accounts," he begged. "And tell the federal agents I was secretly working with you. Tell them I was a whistleblower so I can start over. It is a perfect win-win situation." I let out a loud laugh, cutting through Brittany, pathetic sobbing. "You are completely delusional, Jamal," I replied, shaking my head. "I already gave the federal agents your fake vendor invoices. You are not a whistleblower. You are just a rat trapped on a sinking ship." I pressed the button on my door panel. The glass window rolled up swiftly, sealing him out completely. I shifted my luxury car into reverse and calmly drove away. I left them alone in the cold concrete structure, a crying, broken golden child and a terrified, trapped criminal. There was absolutely nothing they could do. I navigated the spiraling ramps of the concrete parking structure, feeling a profound sense of closure after leaving Jamal and Brittany behind. I approached the ground-level exit where the bright afternoon sunlight spilled onto the payment booths. I pulled my luxury sedan up to the automated gate and rolled down my window to scan my ticket. Just as the yellow and black barrier arm began to rise, a silver luxury sedan violently cut across the exit lane and slammed on its brakes. The car was angled perfectly to block my path forward. The driver's side door was flung open with such force that it bounced back against its own hinges. Out stepped Richard, my father. If Brittany had looked unhinged upstairs, Richard looked like a man who had completely lost his grip on reality. I had known this man for 33 years, and I had never seen him look so entirely defeated and desperate. He was a man who prided himself on his impeccable country club image. He usually wore perfectly pressed golf shirts and expensive slacks. Today, his shirt was untucked and stained with sweat. His face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, and his hair was wildly disheveled. He looked frantically around the exit plaza before locking his bloodshot eyes directly on my windshield. He marched toward my car with heavy, aggressive steps. I did not panic. I did not put my car in reverse. I simply kept my foot firmly on the brake and watched him approach. He reached my door and slammed his open palms hard against my driver's side window. The glass shuddered under the impact. "Roll down this window right now, Danielle," he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Roll it down before I smash it in." I calmly reached over and pressed the button, letting the window glide down just enough for us to speak clearly. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion. "Good afternoon, Richard," I said smoothly. "It seems like you are having a very stressful day." "Stressful?" he shrieked, gripping the edge of my window frame with white knuckles. You called the federal authorities on me. You locked my accounts. My dealership is currently swarming with government agents bagging up my hard drives and digging through my filing cabinets. They are trying to find evidence to put me in federal prison. And Jamal is nowhere to be found. You orchestrated all of this. You hacked into our systems and planted fake evidence to destroy the family business. I looked at him with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. I did not hack anything, Richard, I replied, my voice completely steady. Jamal embezzled $300,000 from your payroll account to play with cryptocurrency. You were too busy drinking scotch at the country club to notice the massive holes in your own accounting ledgers. All I did was fulfill my legal obligation as a financial risk professional and report the massive discrepancies to the proper authorities. Richard's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. You are a liar, he spat, saliva flying from his lips. You are a vindictive, jealous little girl. I know exactly what you are doing, and I am not going to let you get away with it. I am going to sue you, Danielle. I just got off the phone with my attorney. We are filing a massive lawsuit against you and your little shell company for corporate espionage. I am going to prove that you illegally stole proprietary information from my business while you were living under my roof. He leaned closer, his face turning even redder. And I am not stopping there, he continued, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. I am going to call the managing partners at your fancy corporate firm. I am going to tell them exactly what kind of psychotic thief they have working in their risk management department. I will tell them you use your actuary credentials to maliciously bankrupt innocent people. I will completely destroy your career. By the time I am done with you, Danielle, you will not be able to get a job flipping burgers in this city. You will be begging me to let you move back into that damp basement. I let him finish his rant. I let him exhaust all of his empty threats and hollow intimidation tactics. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, panting heavily against my car door, I simply offered him a gentle, condescending smile. Are you quite finished, Richard? I asked softly. He glared at me, his chest heaving. You think this is a joke? He growled. You think I am bluffing? I think you are financially illiterate, I replied, my tone turning instantly cold and clinical. First of all, you cannot sue me for corporate espionage because I did not steal any trade secrets. I simply purchased your publicly distressed debt from a bank that was tired of dealing with your constant missed payments. I am your primary creditor. Second, you cannot call my firm and complain because my managing partners already know exactly what I am doing. In fact, they praised my portfolio diversification strategy just this morning. And third, you cannot hire an attorney to sue me because you do not have any money to pay a retainer. Your business accounts are frozen, your personal accounts are overdrawn, and your massive commercial loan has been officially called in. Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. The realization of his complete and total powerlessness was finally sinking in. The arrogant patriarch who had spent my entire life telling me I was worthless was now standing in an exit lane, begging a piece of glass to save him. He had nothing left. No money, no power, and no allies. You cannot do this to me, he whispered, his voice suddenly breaking. I am your father, Danielle. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. You cannot just take everything I have worked for my entire life and throw me out on the street. I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no remorse, and certainly no sympathy. You threw my entire life onto the front lawn just 3 days ago, Richard, I reminded him quietly. You stood there and laughed while your golden child kicked my belongings into the gutter. You told me you wanted me gone. So I left. And I took my money with me. I reached over to the passenger seat of my car. Resting on the pristine leather was a sleek, thick black envelope. It was sealed with a silver wax stamp. I picked it up and held it out the window, directly toward his chest. He looked at it suspiciously, but his trembling hand instinctively reached out to take it. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I suggest you open it, I said. Richard clumsily tore the flap of the thick black envelope. He pulled out an elegant heavy cardstock invitation. The elegant silver foil lettering caught the afternoon sunlight. It was an invitation to the Bennett family dealership 20th anniversary gala, scheduled for this coming Saturday night at the most expensive ballroom in the city. Richard had spent the last 6 months bragging about this party to everyone he knew. He had planned it as a massive networking event to secure new investors and show off his supposed wealth. I do not understand, he muttered, staring blankly at the silver text. Why are you giving me an invitation to my own anniversary gala? I already paid for the venue. This party is happening in 2 days. I smiled, my eyes locking onto his terrified face. I am glad you remember the date, Richard, I said softly. I just wanted to personally ensure that you and Susan still plan to attend. You see, the gala is going to have a very special guest of honor this year. A major new shareholder will be attending to make a very important public announcement regarding the future ownership of the dealership. Richard's eyes widened in absolute horror as the implication of my words finally registered in his panicking brain. You, he choked out, taking a sudden step back from my car. You are going to crash my gala. I am not crashing anything, Richard, I replied, shifting my car into drive. It is my company now. I am just coming to inspect my new property. I strongly suggest you wear a nice suit. You are going to want to look your best when you hand over the keys in front of the entire city. I pressed the button to roll my window up completely, cutting off his desperate sputtering. I eased my foot off the brake and carefully steered my luxury sedan around his hastily parked car. I drove through the exit gate and merged onto the busy downtown street. I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. Richard was standing completely alone in the middle of the exit lane, clutching the black envelope to his chest. His shoulders were slumped, and he looked like a broken, hollow shell of a man. He finally understood that the nightmare was not over. It was only just beginning, and Saturday night was going to be the grand finale. After leaving my father standing paralyzed in the exit lane of the parking garage, I drove directly to the financial district. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the towering glass buildings. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of my legal team and took the secure elevator up to the top floor. I was meeting with Harrison, my lead corporate attorney. Harrison was not just a regular lawyer, he was a legal shark who specialized in corporate takeovers and asset liquidation. He wore impeccably tailored suits and possessed a mind like a steel trap. When the elevator doors slid open, I walked down the quiet, plush-carpeted hallway and stepped into his massive corner office. The room smelled of expensive leather and mahogany. Harrison was sitting behind his massive desk, reviewing a thick stack of legal documents. He looked up and smiled a rare, genuinely impressed smile. "Good afternoon, Danielle," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "I hear the federal raid on the dealership went exactly as we anticipated." I took a seat in one of the plush leather chairs across from him and crossed my legs. "It went perfectly," I replied. "Jamal is currently trapped with his frozen bank accounts, and Richard is experiencing a complete meltdown. They have absolutely no idea how deep this hole really goes." Harrison chuckled and sat back down, opening a thick manila folder labeled Apex Holdings. He adjusted his glasses and looked over the top of the pages. "Federal agents have secured all physical ledgers and hard drives," he confirmed. "The commercial lenders have officially initiated the liquidation process for the boat inventory. By Monday morning, Richard will not even be allowed to step foot on the dealership lot. It is a complete financial wipeout." I leaned back in the comfortable chair and let out a long breath. It was a bizarre feeling to sit in a quiet, luxurious office and listen to the clinical dismantling of my family empire. But I felt no guilt. Every single legal maneuver we executed was simply a consequence of their own greed and arrogance. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of fraud and entitlement. I was just the demolition crew they had hired through their own ignorance. "We need to finalize remaining paperwork for Saturday night," I told Harrison. "The gala is going to be a very public event, and I want to make sure there is absolutely no room for Richard to contest the ownership transfer." Harrison nodded and pulled a secondary file from his drawer. "The corporate takeover is completely ironclad," he assured me. "Apex Holdings legally owns every single asset tied to that dealership. But there is one more piece of business we need to finalize before the weekend." He slid a heavy cream-colored document across the polished mahogany desk. It was an official property deed, sealed with a state notary stamp. I looked down at the document and felt a slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. This was the ultimate trump card. This was the secret I had been protecting for 3 long, grueling years. The dealership was just a business. But this document represented something much more personal. This was the deed to the Bennett family home. The exact same home where Richard and Susan had thrown my belongings onto the front lawn just a few days ago. 3 years ago, while my family was busy taking luxury vacations and ignoring the massive debts piling up under my stolen identity, their primary mortgage went into default. They had taken out multiple secondary loans against the house to fund Brittany extravagant lifestyle and Jamal expensive tastes. When the local bank finally decided to foreclose, Richard and Susan were completely oblivious. They simply ignored the warning letters, believing they were untouchable. They thought the bank would never actually kick them out of their affluent suburban neighborhood. They were wrong. But before the bank could put the house up for public auction, my holding company swooped in and purchased the distressed property directly from the lender for pennies on the dollar. I became the sole legal owner of the sprawling brick colonial house with the manicured lawn and the heated swimming pool. But I did not evict them. Not right away. Instead, I moved my belongings into the damp, unfinished basement. I let them charge me rent to live in my own house. I let them treat me like a pathetic burden, a useless vampire sucking them dry, while I silently paid the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance fees. I sat at their dining room table and listened to them mock my career choices while I secretly owned the very roof over their heads. They thought they were generously sheltering a failure. In reality, I was letting my abusive family live rent-free in my investment property, while I built an impenetrable legal fortress around them. Harrison tapped a silver pen against the desk, bringing me back to the present moment. "You have been incredibly patient, Danielle," he noted, his voice filled with professional admiration. "Most clients would have served the eviction notice the very day the deed transferred. But letting them believe they were still in control while you systematically acquired all of their debt was a masterstroke." "It was necessary," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly even. "If I had kicked them out 3 years ago, they would have simply declared bankruptcy, played the victims, and found a new way to exploit someone else. I needed to let them exhaust every single resource. I needed them to expose their true nature so completely that they could never recover their social standing." Harrison pulled out a separate sheet of paper. It was a formal notice to vacate. 30-day eviction notice, he stated, pushing it toward me to sign. "Given the circumstances of the commercial foreclosure and the federal investigation, no judge in this state will grant them an extension. Once you hand this to Richard on Saturday night, the clock starts ticking. They will be legally required to vacate the premises by the end of the month." I took the silver pen from Harrison and signed my name on the bottom line with a fluid, confident motion. The ink dried instantly, securing the fate of my family. "So everything is ready for the gala?" I asked, handing the signed document back to him. "Everything is perfectly aligned," Harrison confirmed, slipping the documents back into the thick manila folder. "We have our private security team booked for the ballroom. We have the digital projectors ready to display the ownership transfer documents. And we have federal agents on standby in case Jamal tries to crash the party to intimidate you. It is going to be a very memorable anniversary for the Bennett family." I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored blazer. I shook Harrison's hand one more time. "Thank you, Harrison," I said. "I will see you on Saturday night." I walked out of the law office feeling lighter than I had in over a decade. The legal web was finally complete, and it was pulled perfectly tight. It was Friday morning, the day before the anticipated anniversary gala. I woke up in my downtown penthouse feeling rested. I put on a tailored suit, grabbed my briefcase, and headed into the financial district. But the moment I stepped off the elevator and onto the 40th floor of my firm, I sensed that the atmosphere had completely shifted. The usual morning chatter abruptly stopped the second my heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Analysts who normally greeted me with warm smiles suddenly diverted their eyes and pretended to be engrossed in their computer monitors. Associates were huddled near the break room, whispering frantically and stealing nervous glances in my direction. As a financial risk actuary, I am trained to identify anomalies. The entire office floor was vibrating with an uncomfortable tension, and I was clearly the epicenter of it. I walked calmly to my private glass-walled office, set my briefcase down, and turned around. Standing in my doorway was one of my senior colleagues, looking incredibly uncomfortable, holding his tablet tightly against his chest. "Danielle," he started, his voice hesitant. "I think you need to see what is trending on the local community pages." He placed the tablet on my desk, pressing play. The screen illuminated, and I found myself staring at a heavily filtered video of my mother Susan and my sister Brittany. They were sitting close together on the white sofa in the living room of my house. They had clearly spent hours trying to make themselves look as pathetic and ruined as possible. Susan had intentionally smudged her expensive mascara to make it look like she had been sobbing all night. Brittany was wearing an oversized, plain gray sweatshirt instead of her usual designer dresses, her blonde hair pulled into a messy, unkempt bun. The video started with Susan taking a deep, dramatic breath and staring directly into the camera lens. "Hi, everyone," Susan began, her voice trembling with rehearsed fragility. "We are making this video because our family is living through an absolute nightmare, and we desperately need your help." She reached out and grabbed Brittany, hands squeezing it tightly. Brittany immediately started squeezing out fake tears, resting her head on Susan's shoulder. "It is about my older daughter, Danielle." Susan continued, wiping a dry tear from her cheek. "For the past few months, Danielle has been experiencing a severe, terrifying psychotic break. We tried to get her psychiatric help, but she refused. And now, in her delusion, she has somehow hacked into our family business accounts. She is using her advanced financial background to illegally freeze the dealership credit lines, and she is trying to steal the home right out from under us. She is trying to destroy her father's life work because she is deeply unwell." I watched in absolute fascination as my sister took over the narrative. Brittany looked directly into the camera, her bottom lip quivering violently. "Jamal left me yesterday because the stress of Danielle hacking our accounts was just too much for our marriage." Brittany sobbed, lying effortlessly. "My sister has completely lost her mind. She stole my identity and took out secret loans. We have zero access to our money to buy groceries or pay our legal fees. Please, if you have ever bought a car or a boat from my father Richard, you know he is an honest, hardworking man. We have set up a legal defense fund linked below. Anything you can donate will help us hire a cybersecurity lawyer to stop Danielle before she leaves us completely homeless." The video ended with a tragic, slow fade to black, displaying a link to a crowdfunding campaign. I looked down at the view counter. The video had already amassed over 50,000 views overnight. It was being shared rapidly across every local neighborhood watch group, country club forum, and small business network in the city. The comments were flooded with outraged community members offering their prayers, donating hundreds of dollars, and calling me a dangerous sociopath. My colleague looked at me with deep concern. "Danielle," he said softly, "people in the office are talking. They are wondering if your family is telling the truth. If you really used company software to hack their accounts, that is a massive federal crime." I did not panic. I did not rush to my keyboard to type out an angry, defensive response on social media. I simply smiled a cold, predatory smile and handed the tablet back to my colleague. "They are terrified," I said calmly. "My family is currently under a massive federal tax audit for embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The bank froze their accounts. I did not hack anything. I am simply the senior creditor who purchased their defaulted commercial loans 3 years ago. They are posting this defamatory video because they have absolutely zero legal leverage left. My colleague blinked in surprise, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders as my logical explanation easily shattered their hysterical narrative. I walked past him and headed straight for the executive boardroom to speak with my managing directors. I spent 10 minutes showing my bosses the official federal audit notices and the legal property deeds proving my legitimate ownership of the Bennett assets. The executives completely understood the situation and assured me my job was perfectly safe. By posting that video, Susan and Brittany thought they were destroying my reputation. They thought public shame would force me to back down and hand over my money. They were far too stupid to realize that by soliciting online donations under completely false pretenses, they had just committed federal wire fraud. They were literally documenting their own financial crimes on camera for the entire world to see. I walked back to my office and sat down at my desk. Let them collect their little donations, I thought to myself. Let them feel victorious for one day. Because tomorrow night at the anniversary gala, the entire city was going to watch their pathetic house of cards completely burn to the ground. I sat in my office and watched the view counter on my mother and sister pathetic video tick higher and higher. It was climbing past 100,000 views. My phone was buzzing with notifications from distant relatives and high school acquaintances demanding to know if I had truly lost my mind. The natural human instinct is to fight back, to post a reaction video to show the receipts and scream to the world that you are innocent. But I am not just a human, I am a senior financial risk actuary. I do not fight with emotion. I fight with infrastructure. Responding to their social media circus would only give them the attention they were desperately craving. So I turned my phone on silent, placed it face down on my desk, and opened my secure corporate laptop. They wanted to play games on the internet to scrape together a few $1,000s in sympathy donations. I was going to play in the real world, where the numbers actually mattered. I logged into the encrypted server of Apex Holdings. I bypassed all the noise and went straight for the jugular. Richard had spent years constructing a massive house of cards built entirely on personal loans. He used the dealership and the family home as collateral to secure over $2 million in revolving credit lines from 3 different private wealth banks. He used that money to fund his country club memberships, Susan luxury shopping sprees, and Brittany designer lifestyle. Those banks operated under the assumption that Richard was a stable, wealthy business owner with solid assets. It was time to correct their assumptions. I pulled up a specific set of legally binding documents. I took the official deed transfer and the commercial property lien. I carefully redacted my own personal identifying information, leaving only the name of my holding company and the undeniable legal proof that Richard no longer owned a single piece of collateral. I also attached the formal notice of the active federal tax audit. I compiled these documents into a single encrypted digital file. I did not need to write a dramatic explanation. The numbers and the legal stamps spoke for themselves. I drafted a brief formal email addressed to the senior risk management officers at all 3 of Richard primary lending institutions. As a fellow risk management professional, I knew exactly how these bankers would react. They do not care about family drama. They do not care about tearful Facebook videos. They only care about exposure. And Richard Bennett was suddenly representing a massive unsecured $2 million liability on their balance sheets. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute weight of what I was about to do. I moved my cursor over the send button and clicked. The digital file vanished from my outbox, landing on the desks of ruthless debt collectors. In the world of high finance, there is a specific clause written into almost every massive commercial loan contract. It is called a call provision. It is a terrifying little piece of legal jargon that most arrogant borrowers completely ignore when they sign the paperwork. A call provision gives the bank the absolute right to demand immediate repayment of the entire loan balance if the borrower's financial situation drastically changes or if the collateral securing the loan is compromised. It is the financial equivalent of a guillotine. You do not get a payment plan. You do not get 30 days to figure it out. The bank simply drops the blade and takes every single penny you have to cover their losses. By sending that email, I had just pulled the lever. The reaction was almost instantaneous. I did not have to wait long. Within 2 hours, my automated financial tracking software began picking up massive tectonic shifts in Richard's credit profile. The risk officers at the banks had opened my email, verified the legal documents, and panicked. They immediately triggered the call provisions across all of Richard's personal and commercial accounts. The automated banking systems took over with cold mechanical efficiency. I sat at my desk and watched the numbers plummet in real time. The bank swept Richard's primary checking account, draining it completely. They moved on to Susan's personal savings account, wiping out the funds she used for her country club luncheons. They liquidated their minor investment portfolios. They even seized the joint account Brittany used to pay for her luxury car lease. It was a digital massacre. Millions of dollars of artificial wealth evaporated into thin air in a matter of seconds. Every single account balance dropped to absolute zero. I could vividly imagine the absolute chaos unfolding across the city. Susan probably tried to buy a latte and had her card declined. Brittany probably tried to transfer some crowdfunding donations into her account, only to find it no longer existed. Richard was likely staring at a computer screen that displayed nothing but zeros. He had spent decades building his fragile ego on a massive mountain of unearned cash. Their entire existence had been funded by borrowed money, and the lenders forcefully took it all back. Their credit scores plummeted. They were now officially broke. The smear campaign video was still gaining views, but it felt incredibly meaningless now. They thought they could shame me into submission. They thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They had no idea that while they were crying for the camera, I was methodically cutting the final strings of their financial safety net. I closed my laptop and packed my briefcase. It was time to go home and prepare for the anniversary gala. The financial guillotine had fallen cleanly and perfectly. Now it was time to let them feel the cold, sharp reality of the absolute bottom. The final performance was ready to begin. Tomorrow night they would finally understand the true devastating cost of their profound cruelty. By late Friday afternoon, the invisible digital strike I had initiated against my family transformed into highly visible physical destruction. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the final quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with an automated alert from my holding company's security system. The alert was tied directly to the surveillance cameras installed around the perimeter of the Bennett family dealership. I clicked the notification, and a live high-definition video feed filled my screen. It was time to watch the empire physically crumble down. The dealership lot was usually lined with gleaming luxury boats and premium vehicles intended to project an image of immense wealth. But today, the wide entrance to the dealership lot was completely blocked by a massive fleet of heavy-duty commercial tow trucks and flatbed haulers. The angry vendors who supplied Richard with his inventory had been notified by the banks that his credit lines were officially terminated. In the cutthroat world of high-end vehicle sales, nobody ever waits around for a single bounce check to clear. If the bank calls in the loan, the vendors immediately show up to reclaim their stolen property. I watched through the camera as dozens of burly repossession agents in bright yellow safety vests quickly hopped out of their trucks. They held thick metal clipboards filled with legal seizure orders. They marched straight toward the main showroom, ready to hitch up every single expensive boat and luxury car. Richard came sprinting out of the glass showroom doors like a wild animal cornered in a trap. He was screaming at the top of his lungs. He grabbed the heavy metal chain-link gates and forcefully dragged them shut right in front of the lead tow truck. He grabbed the brass padlock and snapped it into place, attempting to physically barricade his stolen empire. "You cannot take my inventory!" he bellowed, shaking the metal fence with both hands. "This is private property. I will have you arrested for trespassing." The agents did not even blink. They had dealt with broke men 1,000 times before. The lead agent calmly reached for his radio and called the local police dispatch. Within 10 minutes, 3 police cruisers pulled up to the dealership with their lights flashing. Richard ran up to the officers expecting them to protect him. Instead, the officers reviewed the court-ordered seizure documents provided by the vendors. I watched Richard wave his arms frantically, pointing at the showroom and chest-bumping one of the police officers. It was a massive mistake. The officer immediately unclipped his handcuffs and ordered Richard to step away from the gate. "You have two choices," Richard the officer said, his voice loud enough to be picked up by my security microphones. "You can unlock that gate and let these men retrieve their legal property, or you can spend the weekend in the county jail for obstruction and assaulting a police officer." Richard completely deflated. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking small and pathetic. He handed over the keys with trembling hands. For the next 3 hours, he stood on the sidewalk and watched as every single piece of luxury inventory was hooked up and towed away, leaving behind an empty asphalt lot. While Richard watched his legacy get dragged away, Jamal was experiencing his own nightmare 20 miles away at the international airport. I received a tip from my legal team that Jamal had booked a one-way ticket to a foreign country. He had abandoned his hysterical wife Brittany, packed a single designer suitcase, and ordered a car service to the departure terminal. He thought he could just fly away and leave Richard to take the fall for the embezzlement. But Jamal did not realize that the financial freeze I initiated extended to his personal accounts. He walked confidently up to the premium check-in desk and handed the agent his platinum credit card to cover the international departure taxes. The agent swiped the card and frowned. It declined. Jamal scoffed, blaming the machine, and handed her a different card. That one declined too. He pulled out his phone to transfer funds from his offshore crypto wallets, but federal agents had already seized those servers. His digital wallets were empty. Jamal began to panic. He raised his voice, demanding that the agent let him board the plane. He slammed his fist on the counter, drawing the attention of airport security. A tall security officer approached and asked him to step aside. Jamal tried to withdraw cash from a nearby automated teller machine, but the screen flashed a bold red message stating his account was frozen by federal mandate. He was completely stranded. He had no cash, no credit, and no way to escape. He sat down heavily on his designer suitcase in the middle of the crowded terminal, pulling at his expensive tie, as the reality of federal prison loomed over him. I closed the video feed on my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling completely satisfied. The dealership was now nothing more than an empty parking lot attached to a worthless building. Richard was publicly humiliated in front of the town and stripped of his inventory. Jamal was trapped at the airport, waiting for the inevitable tap on the shoulder from federal investigators. Susan and Brittany were sitting in a foreclosed home with zero access to their bank accounts. Every single pillar of their toxic existence had been methodically kicked out from under them. And yet they still believed they had one final chance to save face. They still believed they could host their grand 20th anniversary gala tomorrow night. They were holding on to that party like a life raft in a hurricane. I smiled, picking up my tailored suit jacket. I was going to let them put on their expensive clothes and stand in that ballroom. I was going to let them gather their wealthy friends. Because the final blow is best delivered in person. It was Saturday morning, the day of the highly anticipated 20th anniversary gala. The sun rose over the city, illuminating the completely empty asphalt lot where the dealership used to stand. After the chaotic events of Friday, I genuinely wondered if Richard would finally surrender. His inventory was gone, his bank accounts were drained to zero, and Jamal was currently sitting in a federal holding facility after being arrested at the airport. Any rational human being would have immediately canceled a lavish party. They would have sent out an email claiming a family emergency and hidden inside to consult with a public defender. But my parents were not rational people. They were raging narcissists who worshipped at the altar of public perception. To them, canceling the gala tonight would be a massive public admission of failure. In their truly distorted reality, appearing successful was far more important than actually being successful. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of green tea and reviewing the intelligence I had gathered from the venue manager. Because I was the silent owner of Apex Holdings, I had extensive corporate connections throughout the city, including the management group that owned the luxury ballroom Richard had rented. I knew exactly what my family was doing. In a state of pure desperate delusion, Richard and Susan had decided to proceed with the gala. They had convinced themselves that this party was their final lifeline. Richard believed that if he could just get the wealthiest local investors into one room, fill them with expensive champagne, and project an image of unstoppable prosperity, he could secure a massive emergency cash injection. He thought he could charm his way out of a federal tax audit and a commercial foreclosure. It was a spectacular level of denial. But throwing a luxury event requires liquid capital, and their accounts were completely frozen. According to my sources, Susan had spent her Friday evening visiting high-end pawn shops across the city. She had quietly liquidated her most prized possessions. She sold her diamond tennis bracelets, her vintage luxury watches, and the pearl necklace Richard had given her for their 10th anniversary. She traded a lifetime of material vanity for a stack of physical cash, just so they could pay the final catering deposit and keep the ballroom doors open. They drained the absolute last reserves of their hidden wealth to buy 3 hours of fake admiration. Meanwhile, inside the brick colonial house that legally belonged to me, the atmosphere was incredibly bleak. Brittany was reportedly inconsolable. Jamal had officially been detained by federal agents at the departure terminal, and her divorce papers were sitting on her bedroom dresser. She had spent the entire night crying on the floor, but Susan would not allow her golden child to ruin the illusion. Susan forced Brittany to get up, wash her face, and put on the designer dress she had purchased before the credit cards were declined. Susan meticulously applied heavy makeup to hide her daughter's swollen eyes, instructing her to smile and tell the country club ladies that Jamal was simply away on a sudden international business trip. They were going to walk into that ballroom and lie through their teeth to every single person they knew. Richard arrived at the luxury venue 3 hours before the event was scheduled to begin. He was wearing a rented tuxedo because his custom suits had been left at the dry cleaners, which he could no longer afford to pay. He was sweating profusely and pacing the grand foyer. He demanded a private meeting with the venue head of security. He pulled a printed photograph of me out of his tuxedo pocket and shoved it into the security guard hands. It was a picture of me from a few years ago, looking plain and tired. Richard pointed a trembling finger at the photograph and began spinning a frantic web of lies. He told the security team that I was his estranged, mentally unstable daughter. He claimed that I was currently experiencing a severe psychotic break and had been stalking the family, making violent threats. He ordered the guards to memorize my face and station 2 men at every single entrance. He made it absolutely clear that under no circumstances was I to be allowed inside the building. If I showed up, they were instructed to physically remove me from the premises and call the police immediately. He thought he could build a physical fortress to keep the truth from walking through the front door. He thought a few men in cheap suits with earpieces could stop a corporate takeover. What Richard did not know was that the venue manager had already briefed the security team about the true nature of the evening. They took his printed photograph, they nodded politely, and they assured him they would handle any disturbances. Then they immediately threw the picture in the trash the moment he walked away. Back in my penthouse, I finished my tea and walked into my expansive walk-in closet. I bypassed the usual casual corporate wear I wore daily and reached for something entirely different. I pulled out a custom-tailored, striking emerald green pantsuit. It was bold, powerful, and impossible to ignore. I paired it with sleek black heels and simple, elegant jewelry. I looked closely at myself in the full-length mirror. I did not look like the quiet girl who lived in the basement. I did not look like a scapegoat. I looked like the chief executive officer of a massive holding company. I looked like the woman who owned my family's entire existence. The delusion they were desperately trying to maintain was about to collide head-on with reality. I grabbed my black leather portfolio containing the eviction notices and the corporate deeds. It was finally time to step out of this peaceful sanctuary and go to the extravagant anniversary party they had foolishly organized just for my ultimate grand entrance tonight. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was decorated in opulent shades of gold and ivory. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glowing light over dozens of perfectly arranged circular tables. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated silently among the wealthy guests, offering expensive champagne and hot appetizers on silver platters. To anyone walking in off the street, it looked like the ultimate celebration of corporate success and generational wealth. But I knew the actual truth hiding behind the silk curtains. I knew that every drop of champagne and every exotic flower arrangement had been paid for with the absolute last dollars my parents had to their names. Susan was standing near the front of the stage, wearing a forced, rigid smile. She was gripping a crystal flute of champagne so tightly, her knuckles were completely white. Brittany was standing right next to her, trying desperately to look like a carefree, wealthy socialite, but her eyes kept darting nervously toward the main entrance. She had spent the last 2 days sobbing uncontrollably over her sudden divorce papers and her frozen bank accounts. But tonight, they were all playing their glamorous roles. They were pretending to be the untouchable elite of the city. The room was packed tight with local politicians, wealthy business owners, and prominent investors. These were the exact important people Richard desperately needed to impress to secure an emergency cash injection. A smooth live jazz band finished playing their opening set, and the massive room grew respectfully quiet as Richard walked slowly up the carpeted stairs to the main wooden stage. He confidently approached the heavy podium and adjusted the silver microphone. He was wearing his poorly rented tuxedo, and despite the heavy cold air conditioning pumping into the room, a thick, noticeable layer of sweat coated his shiny forehead. He gripped the wooden edges of the podium, taking a deep, calculated breath to project his booming voice across the silent, expectant ballroom. Welcome, my dear friends, trusted colleagues, and esteemed business partners. Richard began flashing a wide, artificial smile. Tonight, we gather together to celebrate 20 glorious years of the Bennett family dealership. 20 incredible years of providing this vibrant city with the absolute finest luxury vehicles and premium marine craft available on the market. But more importantly, tonight we are celebrating the core values of strong family loyalty and unwavering corporate resilience. We have proudly faced many economic challenges in the global market, but we have always emerged so much stronger. As we excitedly look to the future and prepare to drastically expand our local operations, I want to personally thank all the loyal investors in this room who have believed in our vision. We are standing on the very brink of our most profitable, successful decade yet. It was a spectacular, Oscar-worthy performance of pure, unfiltered delusion. He was standing boldly in front of 200 powerful people, literally begging for their money, while fully knowing his entire luxury inventory had been legally repossessed just 24 hours prior. Just as Richard proudly raised his glass high into the air to propose a toast to his own imaginary success, the heavy carved oak double doors at the very back of the ballroom swung wide open. The loud, sharp thud echoed violently, cutting through the polite applause of the wealthy crowd. Every single head in the room immediately turned away from the stage and looked toward the entrance. I stepped boldly over the threshold and into the warm, bright light of the crystal chandeliers. I was wearing my custom-tailored emerald green suit, projecting absolute total power and calm, unshakable authority. Walking perfectly in step directly on my right side was my ruthless corporate attorney Harrison, holding his thick black leather briefcase. Flanking us closely on either side were 4 professional private security contractors, dressed in identical crisp dark suits and dark sunglasses. We did not look like normal invited party guests. We looked like a heavily armed corporate execution squad. The polite, quiet chatter in the room instantly died completely away. A heavy, awkward, suffocating silence fell rapidly over the entire crowd as I began my slow, deliberate, highly calculated walk directly down the long center aisle. I kept my eyes completely locked directly on the brightly lit stage. I saw Susan physically stumble backward, bumping into a tall cocktail table as the color completely drained from her horrified face. Brittany let out a loud, terrified gasp and quickly covered her mouth with her shaking hands. And Richard just stood there, completely frozen like a statue at the wooden podium, his sparkling glass of champagne hovering helplessly in midair. The shock on Richard's face quickly morphed into absolute unhinged fury. He slammed his champagne glass down onto the wooden podium, shattering the delicate crystal. "Security!" He bellowed into the microphone, his voice echoing violently through the silent ballroom. "Get security in here right now! I told you this woman was not allowed inside. She is a psychotic stalker. Remove her from the premises immediately." Several venue security guards began to jog down the aisles toward me, but my private contractor smoothly stepped forward, forming an impenetrable physical wall. Richard was practically foaming at the mouth. He leaned over the podium, screaming at the top of his lungs. "I am paying for this ballroom," he shouted. "I demand you throw her out into the street." The head venue manager, a tall, distinguished man, calmly walked out from behind the velvet curtains near the stage. He did not run. He simply approached the podium and gently pulled the microphone away from Richard. The entire room held its breath. Richard, the manager, said, his voice echoing clearly over the sound system. "I am incredibly sorry, but I cannot fulfill that request." Richard stared at him, completely bewildered. "What do you mean you cannot fulfill it?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "I rented this space." The manager shook his head slowly. "You rented the space, Richard, but you do not own the building. I take my orders directly from the property owner." The manager turned his body, extended his arm, and pointed directly at me as I reached the front of the stage. "And Miss Danielle Bennett is the majority shareholder of the management group that owns this hotel." The venue manager stepped back and folded his hands neatly behind his back, leaving Richard standing completely alone and entirely exposed at the podium. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites who had just been applauding Richard a moment ago were now staring at me with a mixture of profound shock and intense curiosity. I did not rush. I walked slowly up the carpeted steps of the stage, my emerald green suit catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Harrison followed closely behind me, carrying his black leather briefcase. My private security contractors remained stationed at the bottom of the stairs, forming an impenetrable physical barrier between the stage and the stunned audience. Richard looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His jaw was slack, his face was completely devoid of color, and his hands were trembling so violently that he had to grip the edges of the wooden podium just to keep himself from collapsing. He did not say a word as I approached him. The blustering, arrogant patriarch who had screamed at me on the front lawn just days ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a broken, terrified fraud. I reached out and gently took the silver microphone from his shaking hands. I turned to face the massive crowd of elites. The ballroom was so incredibly quiet that you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning vents. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the expansive room. "My name is Danielle Bennett. I know Richard just gave you a very passionate and inspiring speech about the incredible success of the Bennett family dealership. He told you about his grand vision for the future, and he asked you to invest your hard-earned money into his expanding empire. But before anyone reaches for their checkbooks, I think it is only fair that you see the actual financial reality of the business you are being asked to support." I nodded slightly to Harrison. He had already walked over to the audio-visual control panel at the side of the stage and connected his secure laptop to the venue projection system. "I want to formally introduce you all to a private limited liability company called Apex Holdings," I continued smoothly. Apex Holdings is a corporate entity that specializes in the quiet acquisition of highly distressed commercial debt. And as the sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, I have a fiduciary duty to correct the incredibly misleading narrative that Richard has just presented to you tonight. Directly behind me, the massive digital projector screen that Richard had rented to display his promotional videos suddenly flared to life. Instead of showing sleek luxury boats and smiling salesmen, the bright white screen displayed a series of highly redacted but entirely undeniable legal documents. The bold black text of federal tax liens, commercial foreclosure notices, and official bank seizure orders loomed over the crowd like a heavy dark storm cloud. The wealthy investors in the audience immediately leaned forward, squinting at the screen. These were people who understood the ruthless language of high finance. They recognized a death sentence when they saw one. "Let us walk through the simple math together," I said, gesturing gracefully toward the massive screen. 3 years ago, the Bennett family dealership completely defaulted on a $2 million commercial loan. Instead of restructuring or declaring bankruptcy, Richard chose to simply ignore the collection notices. The original lending bank decided to quietly sell that toxic debt to my holding company for pennies on the dollar. That means for the past 3 years, Richard has not actually owned this dealership. He has been operating as an unapproved tenant on property that legally belongs to me. And as of yesterday morning, all of his remaining personal and commercial credit lines were permanently terminated under a federal call provision. A low murmur of absolute disbelief washed over the elegant ballroom. People began whispering frantically to each other. Several prominent investors who had been seriously considering writing checks to Richard suddenly looked disgusted and angry. I tapped a button on a small remote control, and the slide on the screen transitioned. The new image displayed the official police report and vendor repossession logs from Friday afternoon. As many of you know, a luxury vehicle dealership is only as valuable as its premium inventory. I continued, my voice remaining perfectly even and clinical. But if you were to drive past the Bennett lot right now, you would find it completely empty. Every single boat and every single car was legally repossessed by the vendors yesterday under police supervision. The business accounts are frozen. The payroll has bounced. The dealership has absolutely zero liquid capital and zero physical assets. Richard is standing here tonight asking you to invest in a company that literally does not exist anymore. He is not a successful visionary expanding his empire. He is a desperate man standing on the edge of a massive financial cliff, trying to use your money as a parachute to save himself from federal tax fraud and total bankruptcy. I turned slightly to look at Richard. He had collapsed into a chair behind the podium, burying his face in his shaking hands. The grand illusion he had spent his entire life building had just been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. The soil he built it on, the walls that held it up, and the brand name he wore with pride were all officially the sole legal property of my corporation. He had absolutely nothing left. Not his pride, not his business, and certainly not the respect of the elite community. The room erupted into angry shouts as furious investors demanded clear explanations. People started standing up from their tables, grabbing their coats, and heading straight for the exits. The magnificent anniversary gala had transformed into a corporate funeral. I firmly held the final heavy steel shovel. The murmurs of the horrified investors continued to echo through the expansive ballroom, but I was not quite finished. I had successfully dismantled Richard and his fraudulent business empire, but the dealership was only one piece of the puzzle. I turned my attention away from the broken man slumped behind the wooden podium and looked directly at the front row of circular tables. Sitting right there, frozen in absolute terror, were my mother Susan and my sister Brittany. They were wearing their expensive designer dresses and their sparkling jewelry, desperately clutching their empty champagne flutes. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a pathetic burden, a useless stain on their perfect social image. They thought this public execution was about Richard and his terrible financial management. They thought they could somehow play the innocent victims and distance themselves from his massive failure. I took a slow, deliberate step forward on the stage, making sure the microphone captured every syllable of my voice. I looked right into the wide, panicked eyes of Susan. "You might be wondering why I chose to do this so publicly," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the sound system. "You might be thinking that taking the dealership was enough punishment for a lifetime of manipulation and identity theft. But we are not just talking about commercial assets today. We are talking about the very foundation of the Bennett family." I nodded once again to my attorney Harrison, who was standing diligently by the audiovisual controls. He tapped a key on his laptop, and the massive digital screen behind me instantly shifted. The dark federal tax liens vanished and were replaced by a crisp, high-definition scan of a highly official state property document. It was stamped with a heavy gold notary seal and featured bold, legal text. I watched as the wealthy country club women sitting near Susan leaned forward and squinted to read the document. "This is the official deed to the Bennett family estate," I announced, pointing toward the screen. The sprawling brick colonial house with the manicured lawn and the heated swimming pool where Susan has hosted so many of her exclusive charity luncheons. 3 years ago, that beautiful house went into foreclosure because Richard and Susan completely drained their equity to fund the lavish luxury vacations of Brittany. The bank was just days away from putting the property up for public auction and throwing them out onto the street. But someone stepped in at the absolute last minute and purchased the distressed mortgage, paying the bank in cash. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch across the ballroom as the audience slowly connected the dots. That someone was my holding company, I revealed smoothly. For the past 3 years, I have been the sole legal owner of the Bennett family home. Susan let out a sharp, audible gasp that was picked up by the microphone of a nearby videographer. She covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head in violent denial. Brittany looked like she was going to be physically sick right there in her designer dress. I looked down at them with absolutely zero pity. "You let me live in the damp, unfinished basement of that house," I told them, my voice remaining perfectly calm, but carrying a lethal edge. "You charged me rent every single month to sleep on a cheap mattress next to a leaky water heater. You sat around the dining room table eating expensive catered meals and loudly mocking my corporate career, calling me a boring failure who would never amount to anything. You genuinely believed you were generously sheltering a pathetic loser. You had absolutely no idea that you were actually living completely rent-free in my investment property. I paid the property taxes. I paid the home insurance. I quietly kept the roof over your heads while you arrogantly paraded around town, acting like you owned the world. But the true irony, the absolute pinnacle of your spectacular delusion, happened just a few days ago." I took a slow breath, letting the dramatic weight of the moment settle over the captivated audience. "Last Tuesday, I came home from a 12-hour shift at my firm, only to find every single piece of my personal property thrown carelessly onto the front lawn," I explained clearly. "Richard screamed at me, calling me a vampire sucking the family dry. Susan told me I was an embarrassment to the neighborhood, and Brittany physically kicked my luggage into the street, telling me to go live in my car. You violently evicted me from the premises. You laughed as I packed my things and drove away. You thought you were finally taking out the trash and securing your perfect, peaceful life. You were entirely, completely oblivious to the fact that you had just aggressively thrown the legal owner of the property off her own front lawn. You threw my belongings onto grass that I purchased with the money I earned while paying off the massive fraudulent debt you stole in my name." I opened my black leather portfolio and pulled out a single crisp sheet of heavy white paper. I walked over to the wooden podium where Richard was still completely paralyzed. I did not hand it to him. I simply dropped the formal 30-day eviction notice right onto the polished wood, letting it rest next to his shattered champagne glass. "The clock officially starts tonight," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "You have exactly 30 days to pack up your designer clothes and vacate my private property. If you are not gone by the first of the month, I will have the county sheriff physically remove you for trespassing." I turned my back on my completely broken family and looked out at the silent, horrified crowd. The ultimate humiliation was finally complete. The grand illusion was permanently shattered forever. I took one last look at their absolute despair before I finally walked away. The heavy silence that had fallen over the elegant ballroom abruptly shattered into a million jagged pieces. For a few agonizing seconds, the prominent investors, wealthy socialites, and local politicians just stared at the formal eviction notice resting on the wooden podium. Then the reality of the massive deception fully settled over the crowd. The quiet whispers rapidly escalated into loud, angry shouts of absolute disgust. These were the most powerful and influential people in the city, and my family had just spent the entire evening attempting to con them out of emergency cash to cover up federal tax fraud. A prominent local real estate developer who had been sitting at the front table stood up so violently that his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the polished floor. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Richard, calling him an absolute disgrace to the business community. Other investors quickly followed suit, grabbing their expensive coats, and wives pulling out their phones to immediately cancel any pending financial transfers or scheduled meetings with the Bennett family. The country club women who usually fawned over Susan were now looking at her as if she carried a highly contagious disease. They whispered viciously behind their manicured hands, turning their backs entirely and marching straight toward the grand exit doors. The social execution was swift, brutal, and incredibly comprehensive. In less than 2 minutes, the Bennett family went from being the toast of the town to complete and utter pariahs. Richard remained frozen behind the wooden podium, completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of his absolute destruction. He watched through wide, terrified eyes as his entire carefully constructed universe actively walked out the door. The prominent politicians he had spent years aggressively bribing were now actively pretending they had never even met him. The bankers who previously approved his massive luxury loans were loudly discussing how quickly they could liquidate his remaining personal assets. The absolute finality of the situation crashed down onto Richard's shoulders with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. His knees suddenly buckled beneath his rented tuxedo. He grasped frantically at the sides of the podium, trying to keep himself upright, but his sweaty hands slipped against the polished wood. He collapsed heavily onto the carpeted stage, gasping desperately for air. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently as a severe panic attack seized his entire body. He clutched at his throat, his face turning a dangerous shade of pale gray. But the most devastating part of his physical collapse was the absolute lack of sympathy from the room. Not a single wealthy investor rushed forward to help him. Not a single country club friend called for a doctor. They simply stepped around his fallen body, treating him like nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle on their way to the exit. He had spent his entire adult life worshipping these shallow people, and now they were abandoning him to choke on his own massive failure. Seeing her husband writhing on the floor and her wealthy social circle rapidly evaporating before her very eyes, Susan completely snapped. She could not accept that the grand illusion was permanently dead. In a state of pure frantic delusion, she hiked up her expensive designer dress and scrambled clumsily up the carpeted stairs of the stage. She ignored Richard entirely, literally stepping right over his hyperventilating body to reach the wooden podium. She grabbed the silver microphone with both hands, her perfectly styled hair, now a chaotic, messy halo around her panicked face. "Please!" she screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing shrilly across the emptying ballroom. "Please, you have to listen to me. Do not leave. This is all a horrible misunderstanding. My daughter Danielle is severely mentally ill. She fabricated all of these terrible documents to ruin us because she is intensely jealous of her sister. We are the real victims here." She thought she could manipulate the crowd one last time. She thought she could play the suffering, heartbroken mother and somehow turn the wealthy elites against me. But I had completely anticipated her pathetic, final, desperate move. I did not even bother to argue with her. I simply turned to my attorney, Harrison, and gave him a single, sharp nod. Harrison immediately reached over to the audio-visual control board resting on the side table. He did not gently lower the volume. He reached down and completely yanked the main power cord straight out of the wall socket. The microphone instantly went dead, cutting Susan off mid-sentence. She stood there, screaming frantically into a completely lifeless piece of metal, her voice utterly drowned out by the loud, shuffling footsteps of the departing guests. She frantically tapped the microphone, sobbing hysterically, but no one was listening anymore. Brittany was still sitting completely alone at the front table, sobbing into her hands, her perfect golden child facade entirely shattered. The ballroom was more than halfway empty when the heavy oak doors at the back of the room violently swung open for the second time that night. The remaining guests froze. Marching directly into the grand foyer were 6 stern men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of federal law enforcement printed boldly across their backs. They were not local police officers. They were federal financial investigators. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a serious expression, held up a silver badge. "Nobody leave the building," she commanded, her voice projecting absolute legal authority. "We have a federal warrant for the immediate arrest of Jamal on multiple counts of corporate embezzlement and international wire fraud. We received credible intelligence that he was attending this specific event tonight." The wealthy crowd immediately scattered, giving the aggressive federal agents a completely clear path. The tall lead agent marched straight down the center aisle, staring intensely at the wooden podium. "Where is Jamal?" she loudly demanded. Susan simply dropped the useless silver microphone, finally realizing her perfect life was permanently over. Exactly 1 week after the catastrophic anniversary gala, my pristine morning was interrupted by a highly anticipated phone call from Harrison. He informed me that Richard and Susan had attempted to damage the interior of the property overnight. They had tried to rip the expensive copper wiring out of the basement walls in a pathetic bid to sell it for scrap cash. Because of this intentional vandalism, a local judge immediately granted our emergency request to expedite the formal eviction process. They were no longer getting 30 days to pack their belongings. They were getting exactly 30 minutes. I thanked Harrison, finished my morning coffee, and grabbed the keys to my luxury sedan. It was a sunny Friday morning in the affluent suburbs, and I was not going to miss the grand finale of my family's spectacular downfall. I drove leisurely, taking my time to enjoy the smooth leather seats and the perfect climate control of my vehicle. When I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street of my childhood neighborhood, the flashing blue and red lights of 2 county sheriff cruisers immediately caught my eye. They were parked directly in the driveway of the sprawling brick colonial house. I pulled my car over to the opposite side of the street across from the property and put the engine in park. I kept the air conditioning running and simply watched the chaotic scene unfold. Standing on the large front porch with his arms crossed was a massive county sheriff deputy. He was sternly directing my parents and my sister, strictly enforcing the court-ordered mandate. Richard was panting heavily. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson under the hot morning sun. He was struggling to physically drag a heavy wooden dining chair across the freshly manicured grass. His expensive rented tuxedo from the anniversary gala was long gone, replaced by a cheap stained undershirt and baggy gray sweatpants. He looked entirely broken, completely stripped of the arrogant country club persona he had proudly worn for decades. Susan was stumbling right behind him, crying hysterically, while attempting to balance 3 oversized designer suitcases on her thin, shaking arms. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was a complete disaster, and her expensive mascara was running down her wrinkled face in thick, dark rivers. Brittany, the former golden child, was sobbing loudly as she dragged a massive black plastic trash bag filled with her expensive designer shoes down the rough concrete driveway. The thin plastic bag suddenly snagged on a sharp rock, tearing violently open and spilling dozens of high heels directly onto the dirty pavement. She fell to her knees, weeping pathetically as she desperately tried to scoop them back up. The large deputy barked a harsh warning, telling them they only had exactly 5 minutes left before he formally padlocked the front doors forever. The poetic justice of the entire moment was absolutely breathtaking to witness. Exactly 10 days ago, they had aggressively thrown my modest belongings onto this exact same patch of green grass. They had laughed cruelly at me, kicked my canvas luggage into the dirty gutter, and told me I was a worthless vampire sucking them dry. Now they were the ones sweating profusely under the hot morning sun, physically dragging the pitiful remnants of their fraudulent lives out of a beautiful house they no longer owned. And just like that terrible day last week, They had an incredibly captive audience. Every single neighbor on the affluent street had stepped out onto their spacious front porches. The wealthy women who used to regularly attend Susan-exclusive charity luncheons were now openly sipping their morning coffee and pointing directly at her. The successful men who used to play golf with Richard every Sunday were shaking their heads in absolute visible disgust. My superficial family had always cared more about public perception than anything else in the entire world. Being publicly evicted and utterly humiliated in front of their wealthy elite peers was a punishment far worse than any federal prison sentence for them. I gently pressed the button on my sleek door panel, letting my heavily tinted driver's side window roll down just a few inches. The thick, humid summer air briefly entered the cool cabin of my luxury car, carrying the distinct pathetic sounds of Susan loudly wailing and Richard angrily cursing at the heavy household furniture. Susan paused for a brief moment to wipe the heavy sweat from her wrinkled forehead, and her red swollen eyes suddenly locked onto my sleek black vehicle parked directly across the street. She dropped her heavy designer suitcase, letting it tumble awkwardly into the colorful flower bed. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at me, screaming my name at the top of her lungs. Richard and Brittany immediately stopped what they were doing and quickly turned to look in my direction. I did not wave to them. I did not shout any insults back. I simply rested my right arm casually on the window frame and gave them a completely cold, emotionless stare. They were standing completely trapped in a massive pile of their own garbage, entirely and permanently ruined. The stern sheriff deputy stepped heavily off the wooden porch, holding a massive metal padlock and a thick silver chain. He pulled the massive wooden front doors firmly shut, locking them tightly and formally securing the bright orange eviction notice directly to the glass. "Time is absolutely up," the deputy announced loudly, his deep voice echoing clearly across the silent suburban street. "You need to vacate the perimeter immediately, or you will be arrested for criminal trespassing on private property." Richard stared blankly at the heavy metal padlock, his mouth hanging completely open in silent horror. The fake empire was officially gone. I reached over to the empty passenger seat and picked up my cold iced coffee, taking a slow, incredibly satisfying sip. The front lawn had finally been perfectly reversed, and my own final victory was now absolutely complete. The heavy metal padlock snapped shut with a resounding click that echoed across the quiet suburban street. It was the final, undeniable sound of an empire completely collapsing. I sat comfortably in the air-conditioned cabin of my luxury sedan, watching the county sheriff deputy march back to his cruiser. My family was left standing on the hot pavement, completely surrounded by their haphazardly packed garbage bags and a few pieces of cheap luggage. They had absolutely nowhere to go. Their bank accounts were frozen, their credit was destroyed, and their social standing was permanently obliterated. I took another slow sip of my iced coffee, preparing to shift my car into drive and leave them behind forever. But before my hand could even reach the gear shifter, I saw Richard suddenly break away from the pathetic group. He practically shoved Susan aside and began stumbling blindly across the manicured lawn. He was heading directly toward my parked car. His baggy gray sweatpants dragged against the concrete, and his cheap undershirt was completely soaked in nervous sweat. He looked absolutely terrified. He looked like a man who was finally staring into the dark abyss of his own making. I did not lock my doors or speed away. I simply kept my foot resting firmly on the brake pedal and watched him approach. I wanted to hear exactly what he had to say. I wanted to see if the absolute destruction of his entire life had sparked even a single ounce of genuine self-awareness. He reached the driver's side of my car and slammed his sweaty palms against the tinted glass, leaving thick, greasy handprints on the pristine surface. "Danielle," he cried out, his voice muffled but desperate. "Please, Danielle, do not leave yet. Please just talk to me for 1 minute." I reached over and pressed the button on my door panel. The dark, tinted window smoothly rolled down halfway, letting the thick, humid summer air spill into the cool cabin. Richard immediately gripped the edge of the glass with white knuckles, staring at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. Tears were streaming freely down his wrinkled face, completely washing away the last remaining traces of his arrogant country club persona. "You cannot just leave us here like this," he sobbed, his voice cracking pitifully. "Where are we supposed to go, Danielle? We do not have any money for a hotel. We do not have any friends left to call. Every single person in our social circle has completely blocked our numbers. We are completely ruined." I looked at him with absolute emotional detachment. I felt no anger, and I certainly felt no pity. "I am fully aware of your current financial situation," Richard Furs replied, my voice perfectly calm and clinical. "I am the one who orchestrated it." He let out a loud, pathetic wail, dropping his head to rest against the side of my car. "I am so sorry," he wept. "I am so sorry for everything we did to you. I am sorry we took your credit. I am sorry we kicked you out. I was under so much stress with the business, and I took it out on you. But you have proven your point, Danielle. You are a brilliant businesswoman. You won. You completely beat me. But please, I am begging you to show us some mercy. We are your family, Danielle. We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot just abandon your family on the street." I stared at him, taking in the absolute sheer hypocrisy of his desperate plea. He was only apologizing because he had lost his power. He did not regret abusing me, he only regretted the severe consequences of getting caught. He was still trying to manipulate me, using the completely toxic concept of family loyalty to guilt-trip me into saving him from his own disastrous choices. I looked past him and saw Susan sitting on a plastic trash bag weeping uncontrollably, while Brittany desperately tried to fix a broken designer shoe. They looked like pathetic strangers. I turned my attention back to the crying, broken man gripping my car window. I leaned forward, resting my arm casually on the door frame. "I want you to remember exactly what you said to me on this exact same lawn just 10 days ago?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. "You told me I was a vampire. You told me you wanted me gone. And Brittany proudly told me that you were changing the Wi-Fi password so I could not even sit in the driveway." Richard squeezed his eyes shut, crying harder. "Please do not do this," he begged. "You changed the Wi-Fi password, Richard." I stated cleanly, delivering the final lethal blow. "I changed the locks and took the entire house. We are completely even now." I reached over and firmly pressed the window button. The tinted glass smoothly rolled up, forcing Richard to quickly pull his sweaty hands away before his fingers were crushed. He stood there, pounding his fists helplessly against the closed window, but I could no longer hear his pathetic screaming. The soundproof cabin of my luxury vehicle completely silenced his desperate cries. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I drove straight out of that affluent suburban neighborhood, leaving my toxic abusers completely trapped in the suffocating prison of their own absolute failure. As I merged onto the highway, heading back toward my beautiful downtown penthouse, a profound, overwhelming sense of peace washed over my entire body. I had successfully severed every single string they used to control me. I had secured my massive financial empire and permanently reclaimed the stolen identity that they had tried so desperately to ruin all those years ago. The dark chapters of my past were officially closed forever. I was finally completely and undeniably free to live my life. The story of Danielle teaches us an incredibly powerful lesson about the true meaning of family and the vital importance of setting ironclad boundaries. Society often pressures us to forgive and forget simply because we share blood with our abusers. We are conditioned to believe that family loyalty should be absolutely unconditional, even when that family actively steals our peace, our identities, and our financial futures. But Danielle's narrative shatters that toxic myth. She demonstrates that true empowerment comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to be a perpetual victim. When her family threw her belongings onto the lawn, they thought they were stripping her of her dignity. Instead, they gave her the ultimate freedom to completely detach. Her journey from the basement to the boardroom proves that the best revenge is not screaming or throwing tantrums. The absolute best revenge is massive, undeniable success. She used their own arrogance and financial ignorance against them, systematically dismantling their fake empire without ever compromising her own professionalism. We must learn to protect our energy and our assets from emotional vampires, regardless of their titles as mother, father, or sister. Healing does not always require reconciliation. Sometimes the healthiest choice you can possibly make is to completely walk away, change the locks, and secure your own peaceful future. If you have ever had to enforce strict boundaries to protect yourself from toxic relatives, I want to hear your story in the comments below. You are not alone in your struggle. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of survival and sweet revenge. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their peace is worth fighting for. Keep building your empire and never look back. Thank you for listening. Stay strong always.